Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, first of all, happy Antarctica Day to everyone. I am Aari Lemmik. I'm from the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Department of Connectivity and Climate Diplomacy. And on behalf of the organizers, the Estonian Academy of Sciences, the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Estonian Ministry of Climate, and the Estonian Polar Club, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's conference, Antarctica Day, Polar Science, Environment and Politics. We are delighted to have you with us both in person and following the event live online. And access to the link is on Estonian Academy of Sciences website. Antarctica Day holds a special significance for all who value international cooperation and scientific inquiry, and for all who care about the environment. On December 1st, 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, dedicating an entire continent to peace and science in the interest of all mankind. This date also resonates deeply here in Estonia. December 1st marks the founding of the Estonian Polar Club in 1984, this year celebrating its 41st birthday, and I see many founders who were there at that day here, so welcome to you all and thank you for your work. And Estonian Polar Club has worked tirelessly for many, many years to foster polar research, to raise public awareness, and to keep the spirit of exploration alive. We begin today with opening remarks by Professor Maarja of the Estonian Academy of Sciences. She's also the chair of Estonian Research Committee, and then is followed by the keynote address, Protecting Antarctica, Protecting the Planet, by Birgit Njåstad, who is a program leader of the Antarctic program at the Norwegian Polar Institute. After that, we have two panels that I will introduce when we get there. You will also have a chance to ask questions. Between the panels, we are going to have a coffee break, and the day concludes with a reception from 4:30 to 6, offering an opportunity to discuss and network and meet your friends and make new friends. Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you an inspiring and thought-provoking conference. And now I give the floor to Professor Maarja Kruusmaa. Thank you.
Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, Antarctica is not as far away as we like to say. Actually, everything that is happening in Antarctica has a profound impact everywhere, also in Estonia. Be it warming, global warming, or sea level rise, or freshening of the oceans. It has an impact to our nature, to our society, to our economy. And this is why it's very important for scientists to understand what is happening in Antarctica, because definitely it does not remain in Antarctica. Antarctic Treaty has been one of the most successful international cooperation in the recent history, because we know that this continent is kept away from military rivalry and exploitation of resources, and we can peacefully understand the continent and the planet Earth. Until we could do it until very recently. Especially the Madrid protocols are important for us, also small nations like Estonia, because it gives us a venue to contribute to the global science. Even if we do something very little, it's possible to do that, even for small nations, because you never can have too much data from Antarctica. Every snippet of data or every computational powers that you put under it, or the brilliant brains of the scientists, this all matters to put the big picture together, to create models and make predictions how the climate of the Earth is evolving. And Estonia, so being a small nation, has very long polar traditions, actually. We're going through quite rough times every now and then. Sometimes we have money to do research, sometimes we don't. But all these traditions have kept alive in Estonian Polar Club, where people are coming together for 40 years already and remembering everything, but also educating the next generation of people. And that's also why the Madrid protocols are very important for us and the international order, because for nations like that, it gives us also a possibility to contribute, but also to take a little bit of the responsibility of where the world is going. Until very recently, because things are changing, the geopolitics is very different from what it used to be 3-4 years ago. And I think I got a feeling that everybody who is sitting in this room here feels that we need to make sense of it, what is happening, how we can still keep going to do polar research, at the same time understanding how the geopolitics is changing, how could we regroup, how could we find new partners to work with like-minded people in cases where the old partnership do not work anymore. And I don't have the answers, but I hope if we spend these few hours together in this room, we are a little bit closer to the answers by the end of the day. And I'm wishing you a very interesting, thought-provoking, intriguing discussions, and happy Antarctica Day.
Our keynote speaker, Ms. Birgit Njåstad, has traveled here all the way from Tromsø, Norway. She's a program leader for the Antarctic program at the Norwegian Polar Institute, with almost 30 years of experience in Arctic environmental policy and governance. She has been the key representative to the Antarctic Treaty system. She will highlight how the environmental protocol formed the core Antarctic governance and why its principles are essential for the future of our planet. Birgit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and happy Antarctica Day to all of you, and congratulations to the Polar Club. That is wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting me here today to speak about the protection of Antarctica and how important that is really for the whole globe and how we can be involved. I will apologize already from the start for those of you who know Antarctic well. My presentation might be a bit superficious, but hopefully it will make good sense nevertheless. See if I can make this work. Yep, I can. Good. So what I'm wanting to talk to you about today, I'll split it in 4 small sections. I will very briefly touch upon why Antarctica is unique. Slightly less briefly, why Antarctica is important for global well-being. Then I will dive a little bit into the protection as a tool for keeping that importance and for global well-being. And then hopefully at the end I will either convince you or already have convinced you that engagement is the key here for the well-being of Antarctica. And I'm going to see if I can struggle with my notes at the same time here. It's going to be a bit difficult. So first, a little bit about Antarctica and why it is unique. And this is no surprise to many of you, of course. It was said in the introduction here that we are fairly close because we are connected. But at the same time, Antarctica is a continent 14,000 kilometers or so from where we're sitting today. So it's far away, so why should we care about it? It's also a continent. I often get the sense that people think that Antarctica is just a little piece of land on south somewhere. But Antarctica is a continent of 14 million square kilometers, which I have learned is a bit more than 300 times the size of Estonia. So it is quite a large area we're speaking about. Also, the continent is 98% covered by ice. That is approximately 90% of the world's ice. It has an ice thickness of an average of 2.5 kilometers. There's no permanent population, and is quite recently discovered by humankind. And I think there's a bit of Estonian history in that discovery as well in 1822. Of course, it is a unique continent with respect to life. It is on the land side a very, what we would say, meager environment. There are no trees, no shrubs. The vegetation we see is mostly lichen and mosses, and often not very visible. And the life, animal life is restricted to small microorganisms that you barely see. This strange animal here on the top is a tardigrade, and has, of course, a unique ability to survive the cold environment of Antarctica. The marine life, nevertheless, is much richer, and we often hear about and talk about the penguins, but of course the sea around Antarctica is full of other life, of seals, whales, and seabirds, as well, of course, the smaller organisms, and in particular the krill that makes up the basis of the food system. So all these organisms and plants have adapted to a very extreme environment and have very unique properties that are very special to us. Now, this is just a very quick note on some of the uniqueness of a big continent, and of course we could have spoken for weeks about why Antarctica is unique. But I will move us on to maybe why Antarctica is important for, well, it's not only unique in itself, but it's unique because it makes a contribution to how the world functions. And some of this has already been mentioned in the introductions we just heard, but I will nevertheless just mention them. So Antarctica influences the entire Earth system through its circulation system. The ocean circulation around Antarctica really drives the world ocean system in many ways because of the temperature and yeah, I've lost my words, but anyway, the deep water that is created and the deep water which is created by dense cold water that flows under the warm water further deep drives the circulation around the globe. And the atmosphere around Antarctica is very much shaped, I guess we'd say, for the ice cover, which is very variable through the year because of the sea ice, which shifts in and out during the seasons. And changes in the albedo or the reflection will influence how the atmosphere and thereby the world climate acts, or weather and climate acts. So in my words, Antarctica is the heart pump of the world weather and climate, and is important to maintain for that reason. I don't want to do anymore. Okay, Antarctica holds about 60% of the world's freshwater in its massive ice sheets. This makes it the single largest potential contributor to sea level rise. And we know it's popularly said if all the ice in Antarctica melts, that would add up to 60 meters of sea level rise in the world. But this is not something that is going to happen tomorrow, and it would take thousands of years. But it gives a picture of the potential that lies in Antarctica. And we do know, see the trends that Antarctica is contributing more and more to sea level rise. And there are big uncertainties with respect to how much this could be into the future. And of course, this has big implications for all the low-lying states and all low-lying cities around the world, and has great implications for us on the entire globe. The Southern Ocean and the Southern Ocean ecosystem is also influencing the entire planet. First of all the small life in the ocean absorbs a large amount of carbon dioxide and therefore helps regulate the global climate. So a healthy ocean system, ecosystem, will help regulate the climate of the world. Ocean currents, as I said earlier, they are sort of pushed out of Antarctica, and with that they also distribute nutrients from this rich ocean area into the other oceans of the world, which again supports the marine life worldwide, which is the basis for much of our food and what we live on. There's also, of course, a local wildlife or marine life, which is unique in itself, as I just talked about. But this rich marine environment is very much consists of species that also migrate into other places of the world, or maybe I should say it the other way around. Species from the north migrate to the south during the summer to eat and get fat, and then they go home in other areas of the world. Lots of whales and so on, but also, as you can see on this picture, I chose to pick the Arctic tern. I think it is a bird you also have here in Estonia. And the Arctic tern spends the summer in this area and further north, but it flies all the way to Antarctica to make sure that it is also fed during the winter. So things connect. The ice in Antarctica is a climate archive. It's a time capsule of Earth's climate history. And that is important for us in order to understand the past climate so that we better can predict the future climate, which is important to us in this day and time. I don't want to go into the details of how the ice cores tells us the story of past climate, but we can both see how the contribution of methane and carbon dioxide, and we can read the temperatures out of it. And so far we have been able to look back, as this graph shows, 800,000 years in climate history, which tells us how climate changes or varies over time and helps us understand the mechanisms behind climate change. Just recently, last Antarctic season, an ice core taken at 2.8 kilometers depth, continuous ice core, is going to tell us the story back to 1.2 million years, giving us even better understanding. So this archive is important for us to enable us to meet the climate changes that we are seeing in the world today. And then just to note, again, maybe not a surprise or unknown, but Antarctica is changing, and therefore these changes will affect these global connections that I have briefly touched upon as these changes increase over time now. We see that temperatures are rising both in the atmosphere but also in the ocean. We see that the sea ice is reducing in extent and in timing. We see that there is more melting of ice shelves around the continent, which are in principle, holding back the ice of the continent from reaching the sea. More ice reaching the sea, contributing to sea level rise, and we see changes to the marine environment. And all these things, as I know have noted, have connects to the rest of the world. Therefore, protecting and maintaining the system of Antarctica is going to be important for our lives into the future. Which then brings me to maybe the core of today's speech or presentation, which will deal with the protection of the environment in Antarctica. So I'm back to the map. And that's how the map looked only 200 years ago. This was a terra nullius, a no man's land. It wasn't even discovered, belonged to no one, no one lived there, and later, after 1822, only visited by explorers and scientists, still no man's land. But in the early 20th century, we started to see some countries, 7 in all, making claims to sectors of the continent. And some of these claims also overlapped and creating potential tension between the claimant countries. None of these claims were internationally accepted, and there were other countries that said that they would have the right to make claims. So it was a bit of a messy situation as we moved into the Cold War era. And in the Cold War era, as we know, we had concerns about militarization and resource exploitation in the Antarctica, and in particular maybe a scare of it becoming a ground for nuclear weapon testing and nuclear waste disposal. So there was a need to find a way forward. And that takes us to 1st of December 1959, Happy Antarctica Day again, when the Antarctic Treaty was signed. And this is, again, a history in itself, which I will not go into all the details of. But the situation after the World War and in the Cold War era made it important to find a solution that prevented Antarctica from becoming a pawn in global power struggles. And the solution was really to designate the continent as a continent of peace and science. And scientific cooperation was, as we heard, introduced as a stabilizing force in this framework. And that was inspired by the success of international cooperation in research during the International Geophysical Year, in which 12 countries had successful research activities going on in Antarctica. And those 12 countries were then the first parties to join this treaty. And as was also mentioned in introduction, this treaty really has been a success, and maybe one of the best successes on a treaty, international treaties that we know until today. Today, in addition to the 12 countries that signed the signed originally, or not addition to, but today there are 29 parties that have acceded as consultative or decision-making parties to the treaty. And there's a little bit of a mistake on the slide here. I haven't made the last update on it. There should also be 29 signing parties, which have signed but not ratified, meaning that they are not decision-making parties, but more observing parties. The last party to join, which is not drawn on my map then, is join as a signatory, is the United Arab Emirates. Say it in English, it's hard. So today then, there are really 58 parties to the treaty in that setting there, mix there. So the Antarctic Treaty is not really, doesn't really mention protection much. It established the continent, as we said, as a continent for peace and science. It provided, however, a basic foundation for protection, but no detailed environmental rules. Article 9 says that the parties can meet to, and it has a long list of things that the parties can meet to discuss, but one of the items that is listed is the protection and conservation of Antarctic resources. And in the early 70s, there was more of a push to use the resources in the area. At that time, it was quite a lot of sealing going on in the world, and the Southern Ocean was of interest for sealing. So in the early 70s, there was negotiations for a convention for the conservation of Antarctic seals. It didn't ban sealing, but it did set environmental framework around sealing activities in Antarctica. At the time that the convention was finalized, sealing more or less fell off the agenda of economic activities in the world, so it has really not had a very active life, if I can put it that way. In the early 1980s, one saw the need to have a similar regulation around fishing and krill harvesting in Antarctica, and the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources was negotiated under the treaty and was adopted in 1982, or it came into force in 1982, and it regulates fishing activity on an ecosystem-based platform in order to ensure the conservation of Antarctic environment. One can have a lot of discussions around current fishery activities and whether it is sustainable in the long run, but that was the starting point for the convention. In the late 1980s, one started to, or during the 1980s, one also started the negotiations of a mining treaty or mining convention. To make a long story short, that was abandoned at the late 1980s and was thrown away for many reasons probably, but also because of a growing environmental consciousness and awareness on the global scale. The mining treaty or convention was also, as the Seal Convention and the Krill Convention, meant to regulate in a manner to ensure that activity would have the least possible environmental implications, but is by many looked upon as a resource extraction convention. But noted, it was put on the side, and it was very quickly replaced by negotiations on an adoption of an environmental protocol to the Antarctic Treaty, the Madrid Protocol, as was mentioned earlier, and I will go a little more into details about that as we speak. So that's sort of the run up to environmental protection in the Antarctic Treaty system. It should also be noted, of course, that the treaty parties continue to discuss environmental protection and the need to enact further regulations to achieve the aims of the treaty on that basis. Currently, for example, the treaty parties are discussing a potential framework for tourism regulations, which to a large degree is with the concern for the environment as a basis. So the environmental protocol then came into force in 1991, or was signed in 1991, sorry, came into force in 1998. It's the environmental protocol, the Madrid Protocol, and I might mix the words as we speak, but it's a protocol under the treaty. It designates the Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. It commits parties to comprehensive protection of the Antarctic environment and dependent and associated ecosystems. And it's quite unique, I think, because it is a protocol or a legal framework that protects a full continent. That's the only place we have this. So the framework of the protocol comprises binding legal provisions placing environmental protection at the center of all human activities in Antarctica. And as such, it becomes the third pillar in Antarctic governance. You had peace and science as a starting point in the treaty, and then you added protection as the third pillar, and they are equally important and interact, and both science and protection are building blocks for peace. The success of the protocol, I think we'll have to say, depends on a mutual trust amongst parties. Trust is possible when all the parties share the common concerns and motivations for this environmental protection. So equal and consistent implementation of the protocol is critical for credibility and effectiveness. So this is a picture of the Norwegian Polar Antarctic Research Station Troll. Just wanted to flag that as well. It's just for illustration, not because I have anything particular to say about it, but it's nice. It sits nicely in the terrain there, and we are now working to modernize the station. So we're looking much forward to that. But anyway, the environmental protocol, as noted, it says that all Antarctic activities, including building stations, must place environmental protection at the center of decision-making. And it is then noted that all activities should avoid adverse impacts on ecosystems, species, and climate, and unique wilderness and natural beauty must also be maintained. And then it's more details about waste management and contamination and so on. But in the big picture, environment at the core of every plan of a human activity in Antarctica. And when I say all human activities, we are talking about both scientific research, logistics, tourism, and any other activity that might take place in Antarctica in the future. Importantly, the environmental protocol bans or prohibits any activity related to mineral resources except for scientific research. And that is kind of interesting, isn't it, when you remember that we had the negotiations of a mining agreement. That was the course that the parties were taking, and then they threw this mining agreement to the side and adopted an environmental protocol completely prohibiting mining as a result. I think that is a very fascinating story. And this ban applies to the entire treaty area. And importantly, I think I have to stress that it has no fixed date. Many believe that the ban expires in 2048. You will probably have heard this, but this is really incorrect. The protocol has no expiration date, and so does not the ban either. But 2048 marks the point when a review conference can be requested. That is 50 years after the protocol came into force. But I have to note, I think, that the Antarctic Treaty consultative parties have regularly, I would say, reaffirmed their commitment to the ban, also beyond 2048. And the last time they did this in writing was in 2023 in Helsinki, in the Helsinki Declaration from the treaty party. But we note, of course, that there are concerns in this changing world of ours, that there is a growing interest in untapped resources, and there are geopolitical pressures that underline the discussions on this. The mineral ban is one of the strongest environmental protections, I think, in international law. And while technically amendable after 2048, the process is extremely stringent, making any change politically and legally challenging. So you would really have to have a breakdown of the system for this to change. The protocol has 5 annexes, binding obligations on the parties. It requires that environmental impact assessments should be made for all activities so that you plan your activities in order to minimize environmental impacts. It has strict regulations to protect the native species of Antarctica through the Annex on Conservation of Flora and Fauna. It has rules for disposal and removal of waste for Antarctica through Annex 3 on waste management. Furthermore, measures to avoid contamination of marine ecosystems through the 4th Annex on marine pollution. And then Annex 5, which has a system of designating specially protected managed areas and also historic sites and monuments. And there is a 6th annex which is yet not in force, but which addresses liability for environmental damage. The annexes translate the principles of the environmental protocol into practical enforceable measures and ensure that every activity in Antarctica is regulated to minimize impacts. And they form together really a comprehensive management system, which is quite unique. Also, very quickly, there are, in 1991, when the protocol was signed, there were 31 parties. All the consultative parties, all the parties of the Antarctic Treaty at that time signed the protocol, and that was 31. Today, there are 42 parties to the protocol, and these include, of course, all consultative parties, but also several non-consultative parties which have acceded later. And you will note then, of course, that the number is exceeding the consultative parties by 13. 42 members sitting in, or parties to the environmental protocol, while 29 are consultative parties to the Antarctic Treaty. And today, ratification of the protocol is a prerequisite to becoming a consultative party. That is, you have to commit yourself to a comprehensive protection of the Antarctic environment before you become a deciding member of the Antarctic Treaty. You've had enough from me, I think. Also, very briefly, the environmental protocol establishes an environmental committee, or Committee for Environmental Protection. It functions as an advisory body within the Antarctic Treaty system, provides advice on how the implementation of the protocol and the protection of the environment in Antarctica is actually, whether it's successful or not, I guess is the short version. It has had a role in developing guidelines and recommendations for implementing the protocol's provisions and monitoring compliance with environmental standards. It also advises and advises on designation and management of protected areas and historic sites, and addresses emerging issues such as climate change, tourism impacts, waste management, and so on. And it facilitates cooperation between parties on a high level, I would say. So this ensures that environmental protection remains central to, or the work of the committee ensures that environmental protection remains central to Antarctic governance. And I think we can say that the Committee of Environmental Protection has been very effective in shaping environmental governance and maintaining Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. However, its continued success depends on continued cooperation, scientific input, and addressing emerging challenges. And as we'll see, there might be challenges in doing that as well. I'm not going to dive into this slide at all, but just to note that the Committee for Environmental Protection works according to a set of priority issues, which it revisits regularly, and which ensures that there is a common understanding of what are the most important issues to tackle at all stages. So I thought This is what I've done, of course, is a very brief introduction to the protocol and what it is, and the Committee for Environmental Protection and what it is. And it really deserves more attention in many ways than I've been able to give in this short time. It is a unique instrument. The committee is a unique committee. It has a unique role. It has a unique role for a unique continent. And I think I'll spend the last few minutes to say a little bit about why it is important for further engagement into the protection of the environment through the work or through the framework of the protocol to ensure continued stability of Antarctica and its future for the well-being of all of us all over the world. So therefore, I can ask the question, does it really work? Is it important? Does it make sense to engage? So does the protocol deliver? Well, there are challenges, no doubt about it today. The first 10, 15 years of the protocol was quite easy. There was the same number of signatories as from the start. It was very practical, giving regulations and guidelines on how to deal with waste and so on. But now we're in different times, and maybe the challenges are different. I would maybe make a note of the following points that are on the screen now. First of all, it is a trust system, I said at some stage in this presentation, and the trust relies on everybody or all nations implementing in the same manner. What we know is, of course, that the level of implementation by nations do differ, and that can create tensions when there seems to be free riders, if I can use that term. The protocol, as any international text, I think, is full of quite vague terms and fuzzy terms, and these are interpreted differently by various nations, of course, and there is no really room to define these terms, and that maybe builds up under the first point of a different level of implementation. The challenging issues, I've said, and particular external impacts. Climate change, I have noted as one as the big challenges. Climate change is not caused by Antarctica and not caused by activity in Antarctica. It's caused by activities and our actions outside of Antarctica. So we can, as nations that also have a role in the climate negotiations in the world, of course, try to impact and make the importance of Antarctica understood. But all the time when we're not reaching our goals on the climate negotiations, we will have to face the climate change issue in Antarctica and not being able to really deal with it in Antarctica. And that has, of course, then the feedback loops back to climate change being, or Antarctica being connected to the rest of the world in the climate system. The complication of having numerous issues on top of each other, which is true for the rest of the world, of course, but you have climate change, you have increased activity, you have pollution, you have a number of issues that are acting together and making management according to the protocol or reaching the goal of the protocol more difficult. Antarctica, I said, is a huge continent, 14 million square kilometers. It was said that there's never enough data from Antarctica, and that's very true. There is huge knowledge gaps on understanding the system and understanding enough to protect it in an appropriate manner. So that's a challenge. I think also 42 nations with different value frameworks is, of course, a challenge and will continue to be a challenge as we hopefully, I will say, get more parties to the protocol. But it is, we come with our baggage, and that's going to be set together in this joint effort to reach the same goals. And I think that is then influenced even further in these days by the global changes that we're seeing. Rina was also mentioned earlier here, that we have to recognize that there are movements in the world that are more difficult and more unpredictable. And this influences also the discussions and the implementation of the protection framework for Antarctica. And of course, Antarctic Treaty system, I haven't said it yet, but I think you all know it. It's a consensus system, which means that everybody has to agree to everything before any action is taken. So if you want quick process, this is not the place to be. You have to have patience. But the consensus system, as I say, also makes it very difficult to go backwards. But sometimes it can be quite irritating, I think the word is, to be in a bit of a standstill. So those are the challenges, but I would nevertheless say that the protocol delivers. It sets aside a whole continent as a natural reserve. It's a comprehensive framework, as we've heard. It bans mineral resource activities. It builds under international cooperation. It has a committee which has its members working together to give advice to the treaty parties on, in an adaptive manner on emerging issues. So all that is good, and I think it's also worth noting, even though 42 countries can be difficult because we have different value frameworks and so on, we still work together toward a common goal through the environmental protocol. And I think the protocol has succeeded very much in maintaining a focus on environmental protection as a key to the stable governance and the future well-being of the continent, and thereby also the world at large. That's big words, but I'll say that. And then just as a final, some final thoughts, I guess. Yes, I will repeat it because I think it's big. The Antarctic, the environmental protocol protects an entire continent, 14 million square kilometers large, 300 times the size of Estonia, dedicated to as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. It's unique. It's unique in international law. I have told you, and you know, Antarctica plays a critical role in regulating global climate and ocean systems, and a strong governance through the protocol helps mitigate impacts of climate change and human activity. More parties acceding means broader global commitment, reducing risks of unilateral actions, and reinforces trust amongst nations. And climate change, tourism growth, resource pressures require collective action and adaptive governance, and it requires the engagement and commitment of all. So supporting the protocol ensures Antarctica remains free from resource conflicts and militarization, and maintains the core value of the Antarctic Treaty, which is peace. So I hope then I have made a call for engagement into the further protection of the Antarctic continent, and supporting that through engagement in the framework of the environmental protocol to the Antarctic Treaty. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive overview and lots of food for thought. And now it's time to invite to take stage for our first panel. The panel is titled Polar Power Games, Geopolitics in the Frozen Frontiers. And this panel brings together policymakers and experts to shed light on the political interests, challenges, and strategic consideration shaping polar regions. The panel will be moderated by Estonia's Special Envoy for the Arctic Ambassador Toomas Lukk. Please. Before joining the Foreign Service decades ago, early 90s, Ambassador Lukk was a marine researcher. So he has a long history and lots of love for this topic. During his years in representing Estonia abroad, Ambassador Lukk has served as ambassador to Estonia, for Estonia in Latvia, China, Canada, and most recently to Sweden. Next distinguished panelist is Her Excellency Ms. Belen Sabag, the Ambassador of Chile to Finland and Estonia. Please, the seat is yours. Ambassador Sabag has been also ambassador to Austria, Slovenia, and Slovakia. And she is a career diplomat with extensive experience in multilateral cooperation, having also served as Chile's permanent representative to the United Nations in Vienna. Her work spans international security, human rights, and advancing gender equality in diplomacy. Welcome, Ambassador. Our next panel member is Mr. Urmas Paet, member of the European Parliament since 2014 and one of Estonia's leading voices on foreign and security policy. Mr. Paet is the European Parliament's standing rapporteur for the Arctic region. The Parliament recently issued the recommendations on the EU's diplomatic strategy and geopolitical cooperation adopted. It was adopted in November 26. Congratulations. And Mr. Paet is the founder of the Arctic Friendship Group in the European Parliament. And prior to joining the European Parliament, Mr. Paet spent nearly a decade as Estonia's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Our next panel member is Mr. Marko Mihkelson. Marko Mihkelson is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Estonia Parliament, a senior parliamentarian since 2003. Marko Mihkelson has led multiple key committees and is widely regarded for his expertise on Russia, transatlantic security, and international affairs. Prior to politics, Marko works as a journalist and foreign correspondent. And last but not least, please welcome Dr. Maria Grigoratu. She serves as Executive Secretary for European Polar Board, leading its secretariat and coordinating Europe's collective efforts in polar research. With a background as a biological oceanographer and expertise in research coordination and science diplomacy, she brings valuable scientific and strategic insight to our panel. So please, the floor is yours. And after the discussion, we have time for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and you will be given a microphone because our online followers cannot hear you without a microphone. Thank you.
So good afternoon, excuse me, good afternoon everybody. Very happy to see you here. And on my side as well, happy birthday, Polar Club members. And as was said, there are many people who was at the inception of this Polar Club. And when we were putting together this panel, I was really thinking about the stakeholders. And all of a sudden I see we have lots of stakeholders interested in Antarctica, Arctic and polar affairs in general. It's good to take over from Birgit. And continue on a note, what Birgit mentioned, that comprehensive protection what Arctic is needed, secure stability, and to ensure a continent's future. But there are challenges. And this panel is about to address one of the challenges. And to benefit my panelists, with whom I'm very grateful that we found time during this busy season and out of their busy schedules to come today here. Thank you coming here today. So, but let me frame the Antarctic dimension at our conversation. The polar regions, I generalize a bit, are becoming new global crossroads as melting ice opens sea routes and exposes a resource. And as Birgit also referred to, Antarctica holds a unique place in international relations, and it's being governed by Madrid Protocol, which is until today the cornerstone of Antarctic governance. However, the traditional narrative of Antarctica as a zone of low tensions is under strain. Growing competition and increasing rivalry is visible in Antarctica. And the treaty's implementation, as treaty doesn't have any specific enforcement mechanism, relies on the goodwill of its members. And analysts warn that if the Antarctic Treaty is not respected, it could lead to conflicts, force countries to reassess their strategies, trigger resource race, and weaken global security. Also in Arctic, I just dwell a little bit on Arctic, I think we see a bit different, but the related dynamics. As climate change is unlocking new sea routes and access to natural resources as well. And I would argue that Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and especially after Finland and Sweden joining NATO, has turned security into a central issue in Arctic governance. And these developments challenge the long-standing view of a polar region as exceptional zone of cooperation. And it was also alluded, I think Antarctic security depends on delicate balance between scientific cooperation and geopolitics. And I think the role for us today is to avoid Arctic and Antarctica becoming a zone of conflict, a frozen zone of tensions. So in this context, I think there is time to address a couple of questions. One, how robust is the Antarctic Treaty system, and how resilient is Madrid Protocol in the face of a growing strategic pressures? And where these areas are still places of peace, or where we must increasingly be seen through a broader security lens. Without any further ado, I would invite my first panelist, Maarja. And I would put the question this way. While preparing to this conference, I was looking at your home pages and doing some domestic research about what European Polar Board and EU specifically are doing. And I found a beautiful line in one of the home pages. And it goes like that. The most beautiful sea hasn't been crossed yet. It's a Turkish poet. And on a first glance, it seems like hope, expression of hope and untapped possibilities. And here are my question. How can this idea, this line, be applied to evolving geopolitical landscape in Antarctica with growing global rivalry in mind? And what strategies can European Polar Board adopt to navigate these unexplored seas, maintain neutrality, foster cooperation among European nations, and ensure Europe's influence in Antarctic governance?
Yes. Well, first about the poem. It goes back in history. I'm from Greece, and I studied in an island very close to the Turkish coast. So when I was studying oceanography with some of my friends, we were looking for something that can really represent the feeling of the oceanographers, that science needs to continue because knowledge is not something static, it's something very dynamic. If we think even our phones today, they're better what our laptops were like 10 years ago. This does not happen just because. It's because we have science to back up our activities. So especially when you come then to environmental studies or polar research that might seem a bit distant or a bit abstract to our everyday lives, it's hard to argue why you need more knowledge. Sometimes we tend to forget that the forecasting systems that we're using to rely how our everyday life will be, what kind of clothes we're going to be wearing, what our agriculture will be, how our infrastructures will survive the climate, is relying on robust knowledge and data and observations that we have collectively delivered so we can understand the natural laws around us. But as climate change is increasing, and the polar regions are the ones that they really put on front dramatic changes, the climate that we know is not secure anymore. And this is driven by polar regions. So when I was with my colleagues, we're trying to find something that can really speak to the heart of the scientist on how you can continue producing knowledge and under peaceful environments and with cooperation. And this is why we found this poem, that it's a song actually in Greece, that shows also the friendships of the two countries, that brings this hope that we can do better. So when it comes now to your second question about Antarctica and what the European Polar Board can do, I will say what Europe can do. Because the European Polar Board, we're a membership organization that we represent 31 institutions from 22 countries around Europe, EU and non-EU member states. And our aim is to create a platform for cooperation and coordination. A lot of our members, they're also members of the Antarctic Treaty, so they have their activities there. But European research can still be active and have a voice independently if your country is a member of the treaty. And how we can do that, it's with a European cooperation, by having multilateral agreements or bilateral agreements to invite scientists for different countries to have together to produce research and knowledge, to create cooperation and science diplomacy that lasts with like-minded countries, and to also promote more countries to join the Madrid Protocol and join activities for their implementation, even if they're not members. Because at the end, it's also the activities we're taking in place. And as very nicely Birgit said, how many countries they have created this protocol, there are also other countries that they follow this protocol indirectly. So what Europe can do, and maybe what Estonia could do, is we need to remember that maybe the maps we're using create the false impression that Antarctica is sitting somewhere in the bottom, lonely, but nature does not really care about the human borders. Oceans do not care about human borders. Climate does not care about human borders. Biodiversity does not care about human borders. And whatever Estonia emits, that warms the poles, and how much the melt is happening in the poles affect the Baltic Sea and affect Estonia. So we need to act, and we need to act fast, and we need to coordinate among ourselves in Europe as a continent so we can work together.
Thank you, Maria. I think you have a really challenging task to find consensus among European member states. I hope it's easier to do in Arctic, perhaps in some other places. But later on, audience has a chance to ask questions as well. So, but Urmas Paet. I have to also a bit refer to Arctic, because just last week, European Parliament adopted a resolution warned that the Arctic is becoming a zone of escalating geopolitical competition. So, and this resolution also called for a stronger security-focused EU Arctic strategy. But regarding Antarctica, that was just last week, but regarding Antarctica, there is a commissioned report, What Role for the European Union in Antarctica? And this report, 2 years ago, it notes weakening consensus within Antarctic Treaty system, especially marine protection. And the report also warns that Antarctica's traditional status as a pole of peace may be challenged by political, environmental, economic shifts. And it calls for coherent EU-wide Antarctic policy. So, Urvas, how can the European Parliament develop a unified Antarctic strategy that defends its long-term interests without undermining the cooperative and demilitarized principle of Arctic Treaty strategy?
Okay, good question. Well, thank you very much for your question and for the invitation. Well, it's true, yes, that I am the rapporteur of EU Arctic policy in the European Parliament, and I try not to mix Arctic and Antarctic, you know, it still sometimes happens around us, I guess. Yes, this report was about Arctic because first part of Arctic is also already EU territory. 3 member states have its territory in Arctic, plus, of course, few other countries which are anyway very close partners to the EU. And unfortunately, European Commission's, it means European Union's Arctic strategy is very outdated. The present version is from 2021, and we all know that unfortunately lots has happened in between. So that one of the goals of this last week's European Parliament's report is to recommend European Commission, but also European Council, it means member states, very rapidly to update seriously the EU Arctic strategy. And there are lots of elements, of course. There is, well, security element, there is strong environmental element, energy, physical changes in Arctic, and so on and so on. So that, as we all imagine, that a lot has happened. When we speak about Antarctica, then I would say that the visible political interest of the European Union, including European Parliament, is not there yet. I would compare that most probably the attitude today vis-à-vis Antarctica is like it was vis-à-vis Arctica around 10 years ago. Because when I joined the European Parliament in 2014, then already being before Foreign Minister of Estonia, here in Estonia, I initiated the project that actually Estonia also should apply for observer status in the Arctic Council. I saw lots of resistance here in Estonia because most of people told me that I'm stupid, that what Arctic, there is nothing happening there, you know, it is boring, dark, and whatever, you know, so that why Estonia should waste its resources to apply for observer status. Okay, I left to the European Parliament, I continued over there to deal with Arctic issues. I established a friendship group for Arctica in the European Parliament. I also took under very serious attention what is the status of the European Union as observer in the Arctic Council. And I also started then first, it was around 9-10 years ago, first report on Arctic issues in the European Parliament. And once again, I saw from the European Commission, from certain member states, very high level of reluctance to deal at all on the European Parliament level with Arctica because, well, more or less the language was the same, so that what's the point, you know? There is forever peace, nothing anyway happens, you know, let scientists, environmental scientists work with this, and why we need certain political or even more security approach to the Arctic issues. Well, unfortunately, today we see that, well, we very much need also security and political approach to Arctic to avoid worse to happen. But here is the parallel with Antarctica. I would say that today the attitude, political attitude vis-à-vis Antarctica is more or less the same which I saw 9-10 years ago on Arctica. People still don't realize that even Antarctica is far away from Europe, is far away from the today's maybe most visible conflict zones. Well, but still, the interests are there, you know. Also, some years ago, nobody would expect that China will be so active vis-à-vis Arctica. But now we well see that even in their foreign policy documents, China itself describes itself as a near Arctic country. And of course has huge interest, mainly through Russia, to developments in Arctica. So that Of course, Antarctica also geopolitically is different, mainly because of the location and distance, physical distance from Europe, from US and Russia and others. But what we witness today is the very quick erosion of international law principles everywhere. And of course, the same stability, I would say the political stability in Antarctica is very much based on the international law, and so that the countries who are there, they respect this, be it the political side of the international law or legal one or maritime or environmental or whatever. But today's trend globally is, as I said, very strong erosion of international law. And I rather would be surprised if after a few years we will not see also increasing unilateralism approach and also certain increase of conflicts what concerns Antarctica. Because clearly the interest of some bigger players in the world are also there. So that of course they also have limits of the resources in their actions, and today I guess that especially if you look at raw materials and economic interests, it's around the North Pole. But looking at all these negative trends, I would rather be prepared today than years later just to say that, well, it happened and now we have to deal with consequences.
Thank you. So we might expect rather soon also a new report on Antarctica.
Rather sooner than later.
Thank you, Ambassador. Once again, welcome. Coming from Helsinki, we very much appreciate you being here. Chile has a quite long-standing Arctic research history, I think since 1906, when Chilean foreign minister at the time commissioned a Navy expedition to the Antarctic region for reconnaissance and scientific studies. Reconnaissance also, interesting word, studies. And the first Chilean Antarctic expedition was established, first base in Antarctica. But last year, if I'm correct, Chile adopted new legal framework by strengthening domestic regulation of Arctic activities through an Antarctica law, imposing sanctions for environmental offenses in line with the Antarctic Treaty system. And would you agree, Ambassador, that current Chilean challenges is balancing sovereignty, environmental protection, treaty obligations, and increasing, again, global interest in climate research, fishing, and potential resources in Antarctica? Ambassador, how Chile maintains its Antarctic presence and sovereignty claims while fulfilling environmental obligations and cooperation with other nations under growing global interest?
Yes, thank you. I must thank you. I'm very happy to be here again, once again, and Birgit, your presentation on environmental possibilities in Antarctica were very commendable. I must say that Chile tries to level as a claimant, Chile has to balance the fact of being a claimant, but at the same time, a party committed, a consultative party to the Antarctic Treaty. So we have these two, objectives, but at the same time, we're binding, as Urma said, international law is of the essence here. And I think that is obviously a difference with the Arctic mainly, because the evolution of the Antarctic Treaty and the consultative parties have worked probably in a different manner. But yes, we might find certain commonalities also with the Arctic. But going back to Chile, what we have done is, yes, from one side is a legislation, our national legislation, which is a measure of transparency, because our legislation, you were able to see it, and now you know that we have that. So in 2021, we have the Antarctic law that was passed and promulgated, which was very strong. We had scientists, lawyers, a lot of people working behind that, and our people from the Institute of Research, Antarctic Research from Punta Arenas, which is our gateway to Antarctica. So we had this law that was very duly redrafted. And then on 2024, we had legislation, the implementation, that's normative spectrum that implements the statute, Antarctic statute. So one thing is transparency through law and commitment. Then what we do in the international arena, which has been long-standing, as you know, we're one of the 12 signatories. The map was very telling, so Chile has been there from the get-go. And in this case, we have been committed not only to the Antarctic Treaty per se, peace and the protection of environment, but we have ratified the Madrid Protocol. We have been active participants, but also we take good use of those elements that are in the Antarctic Treaty. Here we have a lot of scientists present in attendance. So I would say that we have a strong commitment to CAMELAR. Then we have participation in the scientific committee of CAMELAR, where we have a Chilean that is now heading and was re-elected. So that's a very strong commitment because we have to put resources there, human resources. And then we have the secretary, the executive secretary of the Antarctic Treaty that was elected in Milano recently this year, Ambassador Francisco Verguño, whose father was also a precursor of Antarctic, perspectives. So what I would say is that we have this commitment to the international institutions, international law, and local legislation. But then the last one, which to my understanding is the most important, is that the factor of the scientists that are behind what is being done. We have the Antarctic Institute, but at the same time, we share our national program with other Antarctic national programs. And here we need to, probably going back to what the EU can do, we need to have better qualified scientists, more and better. And there I think that there are open spaces provided by the EU, let's say the Global Gateway to, let's say, capacity building, research, etc. So there's a space there. So we have people from our region that would probably also work, continue to work together and better. So I would say that those are the four probably perspectives that we have. I would just like to say that on the logistics, we have our research stations, we have permanent stations and also stations that are open during certain times of the year, and then our expedition that lasts from October to April. And there we also collaborate. So I would say more collaboration, more transparency, and yes, there was a mentioning that this was slow. It is slow, it has to be slow. Science, peace, require further analysis, and we believe that also we can get together in a very, welcoming space, I might say. We know that the silence also speaks in diplomacy, so we can take a look at what happened in Helsinki. We had a very good declaration, but then obviously there are times when we have not agreed. And going back to the mineral resources, I would say that we need to be very cautious because I think the treaty is very strong in this. 2048, obviously, there's a date, but the treaty has its strong provisions on how we maybe redraft anything. So we need a lot of support for that, and that gives us a slack. So I would say that we will learn from the Arctic, but also we have our own particularities. So that is something, a way that Chile has leveled it, but I would say that science is a front runner, and we should continue supporting that through logistics, through responsibility, transparency, and an optimistic view that was the one that reigned in when the treaty was signed in 1959 by Chile and other partners. So that's...
No, thank you, Ambassador. Estonia and Chile signed last year a letter of intent to cooperate in polar areas. So what would be lesson for Estonia from that agreement?
Well, we had President Cayulat visited Antarctica through Punta Arenas, which is our natural gateway to Antarctica. And by the way, Chile is the closest country to Antarctica. So that's just for saying. And we have been working together, and actually the Polar Club has been very supportive. We have had scientists from Chile invited. They came for the 40th anniversary of the Polar Club. So we're very grateful to that. They have continued working with the scientists, and I would commend the people that work at the Polar Club because they have been super supportive. And also we have this connection with maritime because Estonia is a maritime country. So we signed this letter of intent, and our intention is to continue working collaboratively, like we have done also with Finland. We also have a letter of intent, a declaration of intent, and we get together and work and see what we can do together in different areas. So I think that Estonia is very well invited, and we hope to have, obviously, other authorities visiting. Probably you could, once you have your Antarctic draft done, probably you could go and visit through Punta Arenas. That would be a fantastic thing. So, yeah. So we're very happy with the letter of intent, by the way.
Thank you, Ambassador. Here is a good time to go over to Marko Mihkelson. So, Estonia has a symbolic link to Antarctica through Admiral Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, who was born in Saaremaa, and Pilguse Manor House is still up and running there, and who is credited with the discovery of a continent. Estonia applied to become a signatory to Madrid Protocol, and Estonia shares Antarctic Treaty system ideals, and through EU membership supports, of course, a peaceful scientific governance of Antarctica and adherence to international law. But at the same time, also we see really growing competition in these zones, in polar zones. So, Mr. Mihkelson, how can Estonia increase its influence in the Arctic governance amid rising geopolitical rivalry? How you see? We can expand also to polar zone Estonian policies from perspective of Riigikogu, what we should do and what we can do. So, what is beyond Mr. Admiral Bellingshausen discovery in Estonian Antarctic politics?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, and thank you for inviting. I think this is extremely important conversation we have here in Tallinn on topics which are actually close to many Estonian hearts who have dealt with both Arctic or Antarctica in this room as well. Obviously, there are people who know very closely these topics, and I must say that Urmas mentioned earlier that he was one of the leading voices in terms of to raise a question for our observer membership in Arctic Council. I would like to add that in our Committee of Foreign Affairs, this has been a strongly supported idea in many reasons, because obviously it is natural for us, for Estonia, as a nearly Arctic country. Like China, exactly. But also knowledge what is embedded in our science already throughout last decades or even centuries, if we go back to Bellingshausen times, in wider sense. So obviously it brings us to the key word of cooperation, which is extremely important in all kind of domains, in science, in politics, in geopolitics, and perhaps today even more than ever before for such a small countries like we are here in geostrategically very turbulent location. So it is important to understand, and I support what Urmas mentioned earlier, that then perhaps 10 or 15 years ago it seemed purely kind of cooperation in fields of environment, indigenous people, perhaps growing climate change as well. Today it is more and more also explained through power games or big power games. And that applies not only to the Arctic region, but increasingly also for Antarctic. And I think I argue that those changes we see today happening on a global level when it comes to the ongoing major war here in Europe, this is something what indirectly, obviously, will affect sooner or later also what is going to be, let's say, approach, if to put mildly, to the future of international agreements about Antarctica as well. When it obviously what we see already in the Arctics, it is very visible and easy to understand even with our challenge, because when we applied for observer member status at the Arctic Council, Russia blocked our application. And as we know, Arctic Council at the moment is in a way in a frozen situation because of ongoing Russian aggression. So when it comes to Antarctica, I think what do we see there? We see very rapid growth of China's interest and presence. There, in 1980s, they had almost zero presence. Now they are most rapidly growing, and that obviously explains a lot what kind of role China tries to play, not only in Antarctica, but on a global level. We see that, of course, the United States are the leading power when it comes to, again, the presence. But what is something what reflects Europe's presence in Antarctica is a as we are, of course, union of many countries, a continent of many countries. And in peacetime, it is naturally easier to cooperate just purely through science and other domains. But today, we need more to underline also political and geopolitical value and interest. And this is where you said that in the European Parliament you still don't yet recognize this as a kind of important topic or theme, and this is, let's say, high time to approach that area, because, okay, European nations, all in all, not only the EU member states, but also countries like UK, Norway, others, in combination, we are a bigger force than Russia or China, for instance, in Antarctica. But the lack of cooperation and the level of backing up the presence there is something what can be improved through the times ahead of us. But again, the same, we see what's happening right now here in Europe when it comes to protect the very same sort of world order, which also should defend kind of basic principles what the countries agreed in 1959 about Antarctica. And currently, we unfortunately see that this world order based on international law, principles, UN Charter is collapsing. And again, the question is, have we done enough as countries who are really keen to defend it to make sure that the world is not going to be rewritten by those who understand completely differently what is good and what is bad, and what should be understood under the paragraphs written in international law. So my argument is that those who don't still understand impact of a war going on right now in Europe, well, probably don't understand also what is needed to be done to protect interest far away from Ukraine or from Europe, including also polar question. So it is remarkably important when it comes to the question how to protect the basic sort of construction of international agreement protecting environment and stability in and around Antarctica is key to how to make sure that those who try to destroy this world order are not going to succeed, and we will defeat them in this war. To make sure that we will defend those basic principles will help us to defend let's say, predictability and the rule of law and international law when it comes to the question of both Arctic and Antarctic.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm pretty soon ready to ask audience questions, but I think there are really two phenomena. One is really global climate warming. We see what's happening today, and we see also growing competition. But against that, I think this is one of the areas, both of them, in fact, Antarctica, Arctica, where we can, if we start thinking today, we can perhaps foresee future in terms of legal implications, in terms of strengthening rule of law and transparency. And as Mr. Mikkelsen said, that alluded to the fact that international law is crumbling, perhaps Antarctica needs a special convention. I mean, people are today talking about that Arctic treaty system works, but perhaps in 10, 15 times we should have special Antarctic convention that would really refer to all these important elements of transparency and rule of law. How does it, Maria, feel from European Polar Board perspective?
Yes, well, maybe as I said before, this is a time for countries to act, because we cannot ignore that climate change is happening, and that has effects to everyday life. And polar regions, both the Arctic and Antarctic, are the more sensitive regions to climate change. And whatever happens to them, it can be seen in Europe. So we expected that Estonia in a few years is going to be warmer, it's going to have more extreme heat waves, it's going to be wetter, and we're also going to have the sea level rise. So how do we live with this reality? What that means for the security of food, security of the region of Europe. We need to also consider that a lot of migration of species, of resources, but also of people will happen because of climate change. So now it's time to act, and it's time to act to try to protect as much as possible the polar regions and also the climate stability. We're very lucky in a sense that for many years there have been investments for knowledge production and knowledge security. We don't start from zero. The scientists in Europe, we have a very good understanding of what kind of knowledge gaps we have, how to address them, how to have international cooperation. Estonian scientists are very well involved in EU projects, in projects with other countries, international projects, cooperation that can go beyond Europe. And we need to put the things in place, because we have already a good position on infrastructures, on knowledge, on expertise, on cooperation. So we need to continue investing on those activities.
Thank you, Maria. I think you raised the issue of countries need to act. I think it's called to Mr. Urmas Paet. Is European Parliament is going to act? What triggers European Parliament, as you said, the interest is not there, to create this interest?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, European Parliament is not a country. so that when governments and countries have to act, I fully agree. Because even in the European Union, I guess we should understand that still the biggest position, strongest position really to act is still in the member states and not in the European Commission or European Parliament. So that when we, for instance, speak about foreign and security policy, it's still full competence of member states. And as we see these days, this is a very rapidly increasing problem, because you always can find 1, 2, or 3 countries who oppose this or that, and in final end nothing happens. Especially when it touches certain and very often business interests of this or that country. So that in this sense, you also told us, I fully agree what you said, that there is lots of good knowledge and very skilled scientists. But again, if you look at the trends in politics, then today we see in many classically in democratic countries even where science doesn't matter. Look at the political trends here and there, where the guys who speak full nonsense, which is 180 degrees in opposition with the real science, they are very popular and more popular. They take leading roles. I will not name the names at this stage, but I guess we all can have someone in the mind. So that this is also an increasing problem, that even science is doing better and stronger job. Also give out warnings what is going on already in Arctica or Antarctica, what's going to happen if the patterns will not change, if the countries will not change in policies. Then unfortunately, I guess that this connection between outcome of science and political decision maker today, I would say, is weaker than ever before. Because so-called wave of populism, wave of just simple slogans, it's there. We see in the European Union, for instance, when previous European Commission led by Ursula von der Leyen made lots of important decisions what concerns environment. Today's European Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen, makes all important decisions to delete decisions made by previous Commission led by Ursula von der Leyen, and she makes the face that she even doesn't know who made all these decisions, a few years ago. This is the unfortunate reality of making decisions, and including very fundamental ones which relate to environment, which relate to all those dramatic changes in north and south, when we speak about the poles. So that, unfortunately, I see more and more that the countries also in the European Union, they behave like human beings, in the sense that they start to move only then when already something really bad happened. Not even we have data on the table that it may happen, and we should, act to prevent it, to change our ways. But it happened in many fields during the last 15 years, be it in energy, be it in the same COVID crisis, be it now, Russian ambitions, what concerns European security and so on. All of it was actually known and foreseen much before. But still, also the governments and countries are very comfortable in this regard, like human beings, that if it didn't happen yet, why we should change our approach, why we should, spend money to these certain areas. And this trend continues. Marco also spoke about the same Russian aggression, not only against Ukraine, but basically against Europe today. And still, I see around myself, the other politicians from other European countries, not even talking about the public opinion in many European countries, where the answer is, well, with us, nothing didn't change yet. Why we should, put more money to defense, or why we, need to change our patterns. Although Brussels airport was 2 weeks ago closed for 2 nights because of Russian drones. Even with this case, when Russia is able to basically attack the capital of NATO and the EU, well, guys prefer to close their eyes and say that, well, it happens, that's it. So, and unfortunately, the same pattern applies, yes, to the linkage of outcome of science in very serious issues and to real political decision making.
So human beings start moving and something goes under the skin. But I apologize to Marko and Ambassador because I think it's time also to ask questions from the audience. And perhaps please sharpen the debate. Is there anyone who would like to take the floor first? No one. Oh, there is one. Okay, yeah.
Hello. Thank you for very informative discussions. Just a quick note, the question. So in Arctic, we see that Arctic Council is brain dead, and in Arctic we are talking about the new ice wall. Are we sure that there are no indication in Antarctic Treaty countries that something similar is starting to develop between the different countries? Thank you.
Whom you address the question, and please introduce yourself also.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Martin Liira from Estonian Geological Survey and Tartu University. And yeah, maybe our ambassador knows better about that stuff. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the bullet. Yes, I think that obviously there are differences. The distance for once, the treaty on the other hand. So it's a different, setting. But at the same time, I think it was duly reflected when Birgit was delivering on the protection, environmental protection on Antarctica and the exploitation of mineral resources, which is frozen. But the discussion is there. I just pointed out that recently in Milan there was a meeting where some people were concerned because they had to walk out of the room because it was dealt in private. So that's something, the silence says something. I'm not going to say it because I represent a consultative member, but I would say that obviously there is, where there's resources, where there's sea, for example, in the case of Chile, Argentina, we have proposed marine protected zones that would tell you something. So if nothing happened, we wouldn't be doing that. It doesn't have to do with confrontation per se, but it has to do with preservation. So obviously there's something that is telling us that we had to deliver and deliver better. But I go back to scientists. I agree that there might be, a certain uneasiness. But I think that if we strengthen the voice of the science in the international arena, and then we reinforce what we already have, obviously we will deliver better. And I don't know so well the Arctic dynamics. Jill is also looking forward to be an observer because we know that there are commonalities. The Arctic University is doing very well in the north, in Rovaniemi. And so I think that there is also a space to better deliver for scientists. So I would answer your question with another question. Do you think that these happenings in the realms of the consultative meetings of the Antarctic Treaty say something? So probably you would read it by yourself. That's my answer.
Marko Mihkelson has raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to say this is obvious that world is not standing still. And if peak power competition is there, Antarctica cannot be kind of, left aside. Perhaps number one question is, who is putting how much resources into kind of presence, stations, backs up their kind of scientific capabilities on spot. So we see, as I mentioned, China is putting a lot of resources behind of it, and obviously this is in connection of gaining a better, let's say, everything what Antarctica offers you, specifically data and everything else. But also we have to think what will happen in 10, 20, 30 years' time. and who gonna set new norms when the question comes, how to follow up to current treaty system. And this is why I argue that European nations must wake up in a way. That if we are not going to cooperate in different areas supporting our presence, knowledge, data collection from Antarctica, then we are not going to be those who will set norms in the future.
Anyone else? Oh, okay, from back there and then from here.
I can start. Hi, my name is...
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, great. So my name is Marko Chikali. I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm the science advisor, actually one of the organizers of this meeting. So I'm very happy that there's so many people. About a month ago, I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference, and I spoke to some ex-employees of NASA who were basically describing the scientific climate in the United States right now as an unmitigated disaster of epic proportions. This is being recorded, right? Anyway, so as Representative Paet also pointed out, that we are living at a time in which scientists and science as a whole are coming under increasing scrutiny. To a degree, I would even argue maybe that is somewhat justified, but that's another discussion perhaps. And my question specifically would be, and I guess to the entire panel, what should we do in Europe right now to basically fill up perhaps the hole that the United States is leaving right now? What is the best action plan forward?
To say, Maarja, this is a very transparent Chatham House rules-based discussion. Please, anyone who would like to answer?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I would say that Europe and European Union included was not, as I tried to describe, not too well prepared for the situation where US at the moment is withdrawing from many traditional parts of their global activity. There are very already dramatic examples like US aid withdrawing from development and humanitarian assistance and cooperation with already very dramatic consequences here and there. And it's obvious that with such a short notice, Europe cannot alone fulfill all the gaps which are there, being political ones, being financial ones, and others. But I guess for Europe at the moment, there should be two lessons learned. One is that as long as it will be possible, Europe has to stick the principles which have been, the guardian principles for European policies for last decades. The basics, of course, is the same: respect to international law, human rights, and just common sense as such. And also internally, in this sense, not to, how to say, the majority, which is still majority, should not let to influence itself too much from different extremes, where also the political extremes, where also science is, I would say, not the main issue, how to follow the recommendations of scientists in this regard. So this is one. And second, of course, is the same, that Europe simply has to reach the global impact which actually is possible, because it's clear that today Europe and European Union is not on the adequate level what concerns positive influence globally. There are enough resources, there are enough people, there are enough skills, but Europe has not adequate global position. And here, of course, I see mainly the faults of member states, the faults also of the European structures, why it is like this. Of course, I, in my everyday work, see it very often in classical foreign policy issues, where even next to Europe, if there are conflicts, the guys are even not anymore traveling or approaching Brussels, but they try to solve it with Americans or Russians or whom else. And this, of course, also applies to the same Arctic and Antarctica issues. In my initial monologue, I mentioned that, even today, we are 2025, soon 2026, the war in Ukraine with all the impact also to the Arctic has been there for 11 years. It didn't start 22, it started 11 years ago. And still we live in the European Union happily with the European Arctic strategy from 2021, like nothing happened. So that this is just one example. But there are many others where I'm very critical what concerns positioning of the European Union in global affairs and positioning it much weaker than objectively it should and could do. So that this needs very dramatic change from inside, how to see global issues, including the issues related to Antarctica and Arctic.
But now we're running out of time. Anyone else wants to? Maarja, please.
Yes, I just want to say, to remember that Europe has already strong infrastructures. We have the European Space Agency, we have Copernicus, we have IMODNET. Those are infrastructures invested by public funding from member states and the EU for many years. So we are well positioned when it comes to infrastructure knowledge. Now the critical point is the EU is has officially started the discussions for the next funding program, 2028-2034. It will be important to see science being a strategic investment for the next years in Europe. And especially for the polar science, the European Polar Board is asking for a sustained polar funding mechanism, because we understand and we know that polar research is a strategic investment for all the European member states, because whatever happens in the poles, it directly affects the climate of Europe, it affects the security of food security, societal security, climate security. It will affect how the Europe will look like in the near future, so in the next years, but also in the longer run.
If I may, the question was specifically about America. I'm not so pessimistic in terms that, United States will stay as a major power, both when it comes to Arctica and Antarctica. We all know about Greenland and their appetite about that, but anyway, so it's what we should do ourselves is not so much whine about what America does or doesn't. Okay, for scientists, we could open our universities, invite them to come over and open our laboratories and, make sure that those who don't feel, welcomed or safe in the States today, they can find some Europe as a place to work. Secondly, I would like to see the similar interest, like Trump asked President Stubb about icebreakers. Oh, let's make icebreakers. So I would like to see that there is also a European joint program on doing and backing up something what maybe nations alone cannot do, but in combination we can enhance the basic infrastructure which allows us as Europeans to be more geopolitically powerful in terms of both when it comes to Arctic or Antarctica the same way. So and again, waiting from Ursula von der Leyen, something, more robust, let's say, approach when it comes to the kind of political cooperation in that field, and nations as well. And Estonia can play a small but significant part in that.
Thank you. On that note, it's very nice to conclude. I'm sorry to Kati wanted to ask a question as well, but I think it's not really a conclusion, but I would say that this discussion is really important, because we see really climate is changing and there is a growing competition between parties. But seems to me that the ATM works, but geopolitics kick in. Challenges are there, and we need to discuss to see how to resolve these challenges. And as Mr. Mikkelsen also alluded, we have time, because we see what's happening, we have time to make a decision well in advance. But so far, transparency and rule of law recognize very important elements what we need to maintain and must be respected. And EU must make up its mind, but a positive note, small states has a role to play, so perhaps one day we submit again application to join Madrid Protocol.
What small state? I disagree. There are no small states. Estonia is not small state. Estonia is compact country, but not small.
For compact state, on that note, please join me giving a great hand to our panelists. Thank you very much indeed.
Aitäh, väike märk nüüd. Aitäh.
Ei, suur tänu, saab asju ka.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Compact states,
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the panelists. And we are now going to a coffee break, and we'll be back for the second panel at 3 o'clock. So welcome back, everyone. We are about to start with our second panel that focuses more on science and research in polar areas, particularly in Antarctic. This panel will last until 4:15 rather, and at 4:30 there will be a reception that you all are invited to stay for. But this panel is titled Antarctic Environmental Protection, Climate Change in Europe, and the panel is moderated by Associate Professor Kati Lindström of Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. Kati Lindström is also a Vice Chair of the Estonian Polar Research Committee and member of Estonian Academy of Sciences. Kati, please. This session will explore environmental pressures facing Antarctica and the role of European science and policy in addressing them. And let us welcome the panelists, Ms. Birgit Njåstad, Program Leader of the Antarctic Program at the Norwegian Polar Institute. Birgit chairs Antarctic Treaty's Committee for Environmental Protection. Then feel free to take seats. Then Professor Tarmo Soomere. Tarmo Soomere is marine scientist and mathematician, and from 2014 to 2024, Professor Soomere served as the president of the Estonian Academy of Sciences, and he was the first marine scientist to hold this prestigious position. He is Professor Soomere is currently a tenured professor of coastal engineering at Tallinn University of Technology. He is also chairman of the Council of the Estonian University of Life Sciences and chairman of the Council of the Forest Science Center. Our next panelist is Professor Jonne Kotta. Jonne Kotta is a hydrobiologist and a professor of marine ecology at the Estonian Marine Institute that is part of University of Tartu and also professor at Caltech. Professor Kotta leads groundbreaking scientific research spanning diverse regions worldwide, including Antarctica, the Arctic, Australia, Asia, the Americas, and Europe. And last but not least, Dr. Priit Tisler. Priit Tisler is a scientific researcher, climatologist, and I should say polar veteran, although he does not look like a veteran. He has studied drifting sea ice in both the Arctic and the Antarctic, but most of his experience comes from Antarctic. He has taken part of more than 10 expeditions to the continent, making him one of the very few people of Estonian origin so deeply involved in Antarctic research. Priit Tisler is a longtime member of the Finnish Antarctic Research Program, and he leads the Finnish Polar Expedition at the Aboa Station.
Thank you, Aari, and thank you to all the panelists for joining us here, and thank you everybody in the room. I have one correction. I am not an academician. That's an honorary title, which I have not deserved yet. However, I am the national contact point to the Antarctic Treaty of the Republic of Estonia. And I'm also a historian. So I work with the history of Antarctica, and I was thinking, but to start off, we'll just go back to what Birgit started the day with and think of, okay, Antarctic Treaty, Europe, science, and why do we put them together? And why should Europe care about the Antarctic protection? So Antarctic Treaty was signed on this very day in 1959. Well, happy Antarctica Day. And it entered into force in 1961. And it was, just as Birgit said, born out of tensions between the claimants to the Antarctic territories, because of three overlapping claims, as well as the tensions of the Cold War and superpower rivalry. So the treaty, how it was developed, dedicated the continent to peace and science. As we have heard, including provisions such as mutual inspections of bases, so everybody can go to inspect everybody else's bases to see if the norms are followed, sharing of scientific information to make sure that the science didn't get lost, and consensus decision making. But more importantly, it also grew out of the international geophysical era of 1957 and 58. And that was a scientific endeavor which happened after the death of Stalin, and that made possible for Europe, well, for Western powers and Soviet Union to start scientific collaboration again. So the treaty was very much about scientific collaboration. So at that time, Antarctic continent was not even mapped to the point where we didn't know where it was, when it started, where it ended. It was just an ice slab somewhere in the south. So the purpose of the IGY was really to observe a geophysical phenomenon, to get to know more about Antarctic, and also to make this science available to everyone. And in the Antarctic Treaty, initially, there were 12 parties, of which were 5 European, but the IGY was bigger than that. It involved 24 European countries out of 67 at that time, plus the Soviet Union. No matter, you can decide yourself how you cut it. Many of the European countries were conjoined, like Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia at that time, so we can see that the European interest to Antarctic science at that time was already very strong. More than 1/3 of the countries was European, and many of the bigger programs were Europeans. So the sole condition of becoming a consultative party to the Antarctic Treaty is that you do substantial scientific research activity in Antarctica, such as the establishment of a scientific station or the dispatch of a scientific expedition. That's written in the treaty. So first new countries that joined after the original signatories, they were again European. Poland in 1977 and Germany in 1981. Today, we learned there were 29 consultative and 29 non-consultative parties, and there are 15 of a consultative and 15 of a non-consultative are Europeans. Again, more than half of the treaty parties are European. European Commission is a party to the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, which is why it's surprising that the Commission does not see themselves as having a remit there. They are supposed to attend, to participate in the politics of Antarctic marine living resources, and also provide scientific evidence for its decisions. The EU is one of the largest funders of polar research, putting EU countries together, if I'm not mistaken. It exceeds what US is putting in polar research, but if we add other non-EU European countries, such as Norway or the United Kingdom, we get to the amounts that are really, really substantial. So the European science is extremely important for decision making in Antarctica. Estonia acceded to the Antarctic Treaty in 2001, largely thanks to the tireless work of Maarja, who was then in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, supported by the then ambassador to the United States, later President Toomas Hendrik Ilves, but also former Prime Minister Andres Tarand and many other diplomats. So it was a strong moment in Antarctic, in our push for Antarctic science and diplomacy. However, we have not joined the Madrid Protocol. And today, one of the questions is also, should we? And why we should do that. So in the next hour or so, we would like to think of a couple of questions. So Europe clearly cares a lot about Antarctic and Antarctic research. And the question is, why? Why should it care? Why should Estonia care? What should we do? And how are science activities and the actual environmental protection on the ground doing in the geopolitical situation of today? So we will follow like this. I will ask questions to our panelists. We will leave Birgit last, because she has already spoken. But this will be your opportunity also to ask questions to Birgit later. So keep your questions, remember her talk, and you will get to ask all your questions later. So we'll do a round, then perhaps answer to each other's interventions, and then open the floor. So the first question goes to academician Professor Tarmo Soomere. So we've heard quite a bit that the Southern Ocean is extremely important for Europe, and how? Like, how does climate change impact the Southern Ocean, and why should Europe care? Estonia has land uplift. We are safe, or?
That's a very good question, thank you. But when starting to answer that question, it was mentioned that I'm a mathematician, which means that I deeply believe that the universe is written in the language of mathematics. And I also deeply believe that the laws of physics are the most universal laws, except when the life comes in place. Life has the power of changing laws of physics, creating order, reducing entropy, and changing the entire planet. So about that will Jonne tell. I shall tell about physics. So the Atlantic, why should we care? It's the most separated system in the world because of the Antarctic circumpolar current. So it's a massive curtain, not Iron Curtain. We have been behind Iron Curtain. We know what does it mean. But it's a fluid. It's a soft curtain. And what is important that in most cases it penetrates basically the ocean floor. Most currents we know are surface currents or undersurface, but none of those penetrates to the entire ocean floor. It's extremely persistent. It has lasted more or less 30 millions of years. And it hasn't undergone large changes over at least 5 million years, even though Earth has substantially cooled and warmed many times in between. So it is the only system of currents which creates the 3 major oceans, of course, and leaving out only Arctic. It connects Indian, Pacific, and the Atlantic Ocean. And this current shelters everything what happens in the south from the rest of the ocean processes. So basically it isolates Antarctic coastal waters from warmer waters which are at temperate latitudes. So this is one of the major components, if not the major, that preserves ice sheet in the Antarctic. But this is only physics. Now comes into play something more. It drives so-called Antarctic convergence zone. It's a zone where the cold waters of this current meet more warm and temperate waters. Even though the name is convergence, it's wrong. It creates also divergence of velocity field, which means that there is a place where nutrient-rich, deeper waters come up to surface. That's upwelling. So this is a major the largest upwelling zone or a sequence of zones which is extremely rich in life and supports the entire ocean ecosystem. So if you think it's all around the Earth on latitudes between 48 and 61 to the south, so it not only screens the continent from the rest of the world, but it also, it's kind of, I would say, enormous marine farmland, maybe a food court of astronomical size, a buffet for everything. So what happens there feeds a lot of not only ecosystem, but simple fish stock, what we have here. So we know that whales are going there to feed. Of course, it serves as a natural border. It's like a border between dry land and ocean. It's fluid, it's soft, it's penetrable, but in some sense, it's much more powerful than even Iron Curtain. So because of such an extension of this system, particularly 20,000 kilometers food court for the ocean, things what happen there around this current, they impact Europe in several aspects. One thing which I told, bioproduction of the entire ocean. It's an appreciable fraction of the entire bioproduction of the ocean is there. And remember that every second breath what we have, the oxygen is coming from the ocean. Second thing, it affects carbon sink. We know that ocean still absorbs a lot of this carbon dioxide which we release to the atmosphere, and areas of massive upwelling are bringing carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere, and areas of downwelling are storing that in the deep ocean. And to the south of this current, there are areas where the deep water is being formed when salt water is freezing, then most of salt is remaining in the water. Water becomes heavy, more dense, and goes to the ocean bottom and feeds oxygen-based life in ocean bottom, not so massively compared to the situation between Norway and Iceland, but still quite strongly. So any change of this extremely massive system is a threat to entire ecosystem, entire Earth system. There are changes which are better visible in wind and wave climate. So over the last decades, there are westerly winds like we have here in our temperate latitudes, and those westerly wind systems have moved a little bit closer to the South Pole, to higher latitudes. So this means a clear change in the forcing of the circumpolar current, and the consequences of that are not yet clear, but probably this current will never die out because of some mathematical and physical reasons. So the wave heights there have not considerably changed. And future projections suggest that wave periods will increase by some reason. But what is much more important is that the prevailing wave propagation directions will change by approximately 5 degrees. So studies in our temperate areas tell us that if wave propagation will change by 5 degrees, it means devastating effect to most of sedimentary shores. For example, the Curonian Spit will be eroded less than 200 years if wave direction would change by 5 degrees. So this change seems to be small and delicate, but it may considerably affect the processes, for example, by pushing warmer temperate water under Antarctic ice sheets with very strong destructive power to these sheets. And melting of ice, which happens there, has also global consequences. As I told, seas surrounding Antarctic are one of the largest sources of deep oxygen-rich ocean waters. If ice melts, ice is fresh. It means that you have much stronger stratification. You have light water on the top. It will never go down, and it will never bring oxygen to deep waters. So this kind of hindrance or bottleneck to the formation of deep waters definitely has global implications, or I would even say ramifications. So putting things together, because the system is so massive compared to any other system of currents or winds on the Earth, even small changes in its properties, they will shake the entire world. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe
no more questions.
No, I was just thinking that maybe it wasn't so smart when the Europeans marine research programs were defined to just Atlantic and Arctic oceans instead of also including the Southern Ocean. Remembered all that? You get to ask questions later. So what Tarmo has just described is massive and super global, and also happens often very deep in the ocean, in the sedimentation. And the big question is, of course, if climate change is so huge, vast, and global, so how does that actually impact the species, the coastal ecosystems, and how could anything as local as a Madrid Protocol, just, governing just 14 million square kilometers and nothing more, how can it benefit the protection of these species that are in the whim of a global climate change? Jonne.
Thanks. Give a professor floor, and then we can talk hours and hours. No problem. But I believe you are not here for getting a PhD or micrograde or something, so I try to summarize as much as I know, I understand. I'm actually very happy of Tarmo's introduction to the topic, because I don't have to explain about physics and mathematics, so that's a basis actually how we have certain kind of rules on this planet. And then coming to biota. So I believe the highest problem what we have in Antarctica is a reorganization of the food webs. So the climate change is impacting all possible trophic levels. So lots of feedback loops is still not well understood, because as you said, the laws of physics not necessarily apply because it's a complex system, biota. But we already know, for example, that what's happening, for example, when we have a melting of a sea ice, it's not only like water is becoming fresher. It also means that we have certain clines in the water, so light is not getting as deep as before, so we are losing a primary production that infects all the secondary and so on production, so krill population, and even further, so when we go like in a sea floor, in a shallow areas, that's, I don't know how much of you knows that Antarctica, the visibility in Antarctica is the greatest on Earth. So it's you can even experience 100 meters or even more horizontal visibility. That's amazing if you're a diver. That's a good spot to go, and that can change. And obviously that shifts all possible things. But then you had actually two questions to me, so that was the first part of it. And the second part is like a Madrid Protocol, so how that can be helpful. And certainly it does, because we have to worry about the global processes, and we have to mitigate how we are managing all possible this greenhouse gases emission and so on, and the biodiversity, etc. But at the end, what matters is what we are doing also locally, because local actions are determining the consequences of our own activities. And just now moving so far away from the polar zones, like going to tropics, so there are evidence in all possible biomes that if you reduce human pressures, then the ecosystems are much more resilient. So, and that suggested that if we are able to reduce non-climatic pressures in Antarctica, fishing, pollution, so on, then the Antarctic community is becoming more and more resilient, and we can buy a few years more. So we can save the ecosystems and make sure that nothing bad is happening, and we can also learn how to avoid a future crisis to happen, because it's not only about a climate change as such, but we are pushing the temperature higher level in Antarctica. That opens up the window of invasive species, and of course invasive species come with the people. So if we are traveling, so we are bringing along different types of organisms, from the microscopic organisms up to even fishes and so on. So we have to understand how to stop those kinds of things, and that's why we have a Madrid protocol. And that's not only this, so I can talk forever, but yeah, basically, this is why we need it. We need agreements, and solid agreements, everybody happily following.
So it's not enough to just act on climate at home. It
No, you
is
have to,
actually important
you have to,
also
to do something in your places.
ground.
So, for example, you have this, you map a sensitivity and all these habitat forming communities, habitats, and then you try to protect those as much as possible. But as I said, we have very little info. We know a lot, but we still miss a lot of information about Antarctica. So we have to make sure that all this information is used when some management's happening or policy arena. So that has to be taken into consideration.
Which is why it's good to be in the environmental, to have joined Madrid Protocol and to be in the Environmental Protection Committee so that your science actually gets to that table. Preet, you've been there for 11 winters now.
Summers.
Sorry, our winters, your summers.
Our winter.
And you've been running the logistics of the FinArp campaign and also working with meteorology. And now weather and climate are two different things, but how noticeable are the changes over the past decades for a scientist on the ground? How do they impact the operations? And also how noticeable are the changes in the political climate for you who are actually with the boots or boats on the ground?
Thank you for the question. Well, yes, during the seasons I have spent on ice, they are different. Some season you have 3 or 4 strong storms, but for instance, last season we had no storms at all. And it's very hard to draw any solid conclusions if you stay in the inland of Antarctica. The changes are very small comparing, for instance, for peninsula or coastlines. Just maybe one example, today was also mentioned that Antarctica is melting and we are all sinking sooner or later, all of us, as a joke. But yes, it's interesting that inland ice sheet actually is growing in Antarctica. And the reasons, maybe one of Tarmo mentioned, maybe it's one reason, but very precise gravity measurements show that the accumulation of ice and snow has positive speed impact inland. And in order to understand these kind of things, what we need measurements, we need observations. Antarctica is almost twice as Australia big, and there are not so many research stations in Antarctica. Otherwise, if people are doing modeling, they know that if the model input is garbage, output is as well same garbage. And most probably Estonia is not going to have own research station, at least in nearest future in Antarctica. But there are a lot of stations are very eager and happy to host scientists from other countries. And here I am encouraged also Estonian scientists and young scientists, particularly to find the possibilities to join this kind of studies in Antarctica. I don't know what would be this nice slogan to sell this topic, something like that. Well, freezing cold Antarctica equals hot sexy science or something like that. I don't know. I don't know. Yes, anyway, this is another part of this question was about politics. Yes, last 3 years they have been quite different. And let's say 4 years ago it was okay to take a plane, Illusion 76, with Russian permits, fly from Cape Town to Novo airstrip in vicinity of Russian Novorossiysk station and enjoy all logistics and facilities there. But this is not anymore the case. I'm talking about Tronic Maadland, but I'm quite happy we have several stations, Nordic station in Tronic Maadland as well, German station Neumayer, and right now there are two ways to reach Antarctica to our station. It's first to use White Desert Company, or another way, Norwegian colleagues. Birgit, thank you very much. Directly flight from Oslo to Norwegian station Troll, and further with, for example, White Desert feeder flights to our station. Feeder flights mean domestic flights. Yes, that's, things are changed quite a lot, but still there are meetings, where not only Antarctic Treaty meeting, but also COMNAP meeting. It's a Council of Managers of National Antarctic Programs that there are all present, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, all. But it is agreed that people do not talk about politics at this forum. We are discussing only technical issues so far. But the tension and the atmosphere is, you can feel it. Thank you.
How is it when you're in the COMNAP? I mean, I understand that in Tronic Maadland, in your area, the ice conditions haven't changed so much. But what about those stations in the peninsula area or areas that are having a larger ice loss? Has that meant a lot for the logistics? Have they needed to reconsider how they operate in Antarctica?
Peninsula is quite different position because there is so short distance from Ushuaia or Punta Arenas, and that it's so easy to travel, and there are quite nice flight connections as well available. It's different, yes. And also Rossi is different. It's United States and Australia. They are running quite a lot ships using and etc. And it's rich countries. They have a lot of money. We are not so rich. From this point of view, actually, it's quite interesting that even Ukraine actually is quite active in Antarctic. They have this season, if I remember correctly, 13 persons overwintering, and they are running our own polar icebreaker as well in Antarctica. They have very nice resources, obviously.
Thank you. Birgit, thank you for your talk today. It was a joy to listen. And maybe coming back to that a big map where Estonia was one of the very few countries not painted in the right color for Madrid Protocol. And I guess to convince the skeptics, we would need you to answer, what can the Committee of Environmental Protection actually do for Antarctica if the changes are so global? And does it really matter if Estonia sits at the table? Or is it enough if we leave it to the big countries to do that, to sit and vote?
Thank you for that easy question. So two parts there, right? Science what does it matter when all the things are global anyway, happening from the global perspective? And I think it comes back to a little what was said here as well. Protecting in Antarctica actually also has relevance for the system and the development of the system. Understanding the system and thereby contributing to the global discussions matters. I'm not a professor, so I don't talk long. I talk short, so I take more questions. But I think the issue about what kind of small country do, I think it's, well, by sitting by the table, you have a voice. And I think having a voice is important, especially in a time where there's more waves, to ensure that the balance is kept and maintained, instead of sitting outside and hoping for the best in many ways. And my question always comes, I come back as a question, what if if we didn't have parties sitting at the table, what would we have then? Then we have nothing. So the environmental protocol is really the best we have to ensure that we have the best possible, I think, international agreed protection, which I think is the interest of all countries that are affected by Antarctica, which I think we've heard is everyone, to be part of in ensuring that protection is maintained. So that's a sort of a roundabout argument, but I think well, by not sitting at the table, you really don't have anything to say, do you? It's that easy and that complex.
Mm. So it's not enough for us to go and go through European Commission, for example, I suppose.
Oh? That's the answer.
Yeah. Okay, so Madrid Protocol is a unique instrument in the international law in a sense that it obliges the treaty parties to follow the best available science to protect Antarctica for the entire mankind. And now the question is, what is the best available science, and what is the best science that we would still need to go forward, and what can Estonia do? Is it enough if, again, the great countries float their boats, or what can we do? And I think I just would go back to Tarmo.
Basically, you have two options if you are representing a compact country. Either you are at the table or you are in the menu. As Lennart Meri has told, again paraphrasing, the nuclear weapon of a compact country is international laws, regulations, and agreements. So what science can do here? Again, it's twofold what science can do here. First, we have to do excellent science. And this is what Estonia is doing in terms of normalized impact of our science. We are now in place 3 in the world, only behind Singapore and Iceland, which means that our voice has been heard and used. So on top of that, we know that converting science into applications is not so easy, especially on international level. So this is done pretty much by science diplomacy in great many variations, starting from scientists acting as in the role of diplomats, like Thomas Luck was actually a scientist before he became a diplomat, and that's why he's a good diplomat. But scientists have much larger role in diplomacy, and different international agreements like Madrid Protocol is the natural way where a compact nation can have its dreams, arguments, aspirations, wishes, etc., even if not discussed, but in the agenda. And this is what is being done all the time, I would say behind curtains, not behind iron curtains, but behind curtains, that scientists are representing the best ideas of the country on different international fora. They might be scientific fora, like different networks of academies, but scientists are more and more frequently used to talk to scientists of other countries with hope that those scientists in other countries will tell their governments what is the right thing to do.
I agree.
Good. So excellent science. Any other suggestions?
Excellent science is the starting point. If you don't have excellent science, then you don't have science diplomacy, and you are really a poor country.
We heard so much about we don't know this yet, we don't know that yet, so Jonna, what do we need to do? Like, should we get an icebreaker? Should we get on somebody else's boat? Or should we just let the Chileans go with their boats? Or what do we do?
I think there are so many layers about this question. So I guess first thing is politics. Politics is mostly about interest. We all know this. And then we must acknowledge that there are short-term and long-term interests. So very different. So if you put this short-term and long-term into a monetary terms, you can actually realize that sometimes long-term interest becomes more valuable. So, and this is a role of scientists to make the different stakeholders understand a bit about what's the difference between facts and opinions. So scientists are able to crystallize what we know and what we don't, what we can know and what we can't. And then when it comes to Estonia, then you all know that we are a nation of digitalization and all those kinds of things. And then nowadays in European Union, they talk so much about this digital twin and so on. But so far, even the digital twin within Europe is very much about salinity, temperature, but we need to protect our nature. So it's not so much about the biota, habitat species, interactions, flows of food webs and so on. So what we need to do is we need to deliver a digital twin, ecological digital twin of Antarctica that puts together all these bits what we have using the best available modeling of all possible nations who want to contribute and delivering the best known scenario-based analysis and then use it. And I'm sure the politicians, they are very much aware of their investors and their interest. And if, for example, a fishery sector would understand that, okay, with this we can earn some more billions, I'm sure we have some changing landscape. But for this, we need a good instrument, and that can be this sort of web-based tool or whatever.
It's not like a metaverse of the environment where we can move into when we've destroyed the real one.
No,
it's
no,
more
it's real.
like
it's
a
real. I mean, it's a
tool.
decision-making tool that is not generating your alternative digital realism and forgetting all the real world. No, it's actually for helping us to safeguard nature.
Isn't there enough weather data already? So, I mean, why do we need to do that every year? Why, and around the clock? Like, what's, yeah, you said it's badly covered, there are badly covered areas and so, but what is good climate data? And what can we do, again?
What can we do? Well, yes, there are two ways, in situ measurements as well using satellites. And these satellites are available as data year-round and almost from everywhere. And this data analyzing, it's maybe one way we can do in Estonia. But it's, well, if satellites give you some numbers, you have somehow to validate this data. And I've been in part of small project actually where knowing when the satellite is going over us, and at the same time we are measuring this, let's say, snow density and some other parameters in order to just take these two sources of information together. Maybe this satellite data, maybe it's tomorrow's because in situ measurements for Estonia, I think it's still at very present moment quite expensive.
Okay, so there are things that we can do even if we don't necessarily park on a boat.
Exactly.
Or
that's not the case only in Estonia. I know a number of Finnish scientific projects as well. They are dealing with Antarctic studies, but they stay in Helsinki.
That sounds comfortable.
Not for me.
Madrid the Committee for Environmental Protection is is now in the process of tourism, negotiating tourism network, tourism framework, to regulate tourist activities. And I was wondering, Birgit, first, why is there a reason to worry? I mean, it's such a huge continent. And second, do we know enough to regulate? That's always something that some countries say, well, we don't have enough science, and there's another science, and do we know enough to take action on the local ground?
Yeah, why do we worry? It's a big continent. I think I said that a few times, 14 million square kilometers, you mentioned it as well. But the fact is that the tourism in Antarctica, which is growing day by day, basically, is concentrated to one small part of Antarctica. And that's the one small part that is ice-free, and which therefore is the area of Antarctica that is most biological active on land, put it that way, both with regard to vegetation, but also as a breeding ground for marine mammals and seabirds, and therefore is quite vulnerable in one way or the other. And when you have by now, so the peninsula is this little panhandle that sticks out of Antarctica and goes up to about 60 degrees south, which is about the same latitude as this is in north, I think. Today, I think there is approximately 130,000 tourists coming every season into this small area. And as I understand it, we're now speaking of so dense traffic that it's difficult to operate for a cruise boat to not see other cruise boats. And that's sort of one of the selling points, right? You're in the wilderness. So if you meet another boat around every corner, you're kind of losing that point. That in itself is not important, but it kind of illustrates the stress level, I think. And all these 130 tourists, they are promised 2 landings a day on sites of interest, which means in biological interesting areas mostly. There's 1 or 2 historical sites as well, but mostly biological active. So that makes an impact. And I also have to mention that there is a growing inland tourism, maybe less of a problem with respect to biology, a lot of ice, but much more high risk activity. And with all that encounters, but that's maybe less environmental concern than the peninsula traffic. Do we not know enough to say that this is going overboard? No, actually. Depends on how you want to answer that. I mean, in one sense, I will be one of the first to say that, precautionary speaking, we need to level up in one way or the other now. But if you want to look in science and say what are the impacts of tourism, there's actually very little knowledge. And that's maybe to a large degree also because these large overriding changes, climate change and so on, are so big that they mask, in a sense, the on-the-ground impacts, which are important. We talked about that a little bit earlier. You at least have to stop those impacts that are under our control. But we don't have sufficient evidence to, obviously it seems like, for all parties to say that we have enough science. So to continue a little on that, I mean, we need to find ways. First of all, we need to be precautionary. I think that's important if we want to maintain and protect. But also we need to continue to do good science, excellent science, not only on the climate system and so on, but also understanding Antarctica and its vulnerabilities. And for that, we need high level of international cooperation on all levels. And that's, again, a place where smaller or compact countries can contribute as well, not necessarily on their own feet, but also as part of international efforts.
Yes. Just one small remark. I have noticed that recently private companies are advertising that there are also for tourists special programs how to scientists work in Antarctica. Of course, they have to pay money, and quite a lot, but there is a possibility to see, let's say, well, somebody is taking some snow samples or something like that to show how there is science is done in Antarctica. Just one small remark on that.
But it's if I may, an interesting, and it's an interesting situation where it's a good illustration of the importance of science to tourists. But it's also a selling point for tourism, so that you increase tourism. So you're sort of seesaw there, which is kind of an interesting and a part of the discussions of that framework of tourism regulations.
From a physical mechanistic point of view, the impact of tourism or any human activity in Antarctica is a typical example of a threshold-based process. If I may very strongly generalize and possibly oversimplify, until the temperature is well below freezing temperature, you can't have large impact on Antarctic ecosystem. But from the moment when there is a kind of appreciable time of availability of liquid water, then any impact will grow explosively. Not exponentially, which is slow, but explosively. So in this sense, the possible climate change and warming of the entire planet is, I would say, a very strong warning signal for Antarctica as well. And you know that warming is not going homogeneously over the world. If we have now, on average, 1.3 degree increase in temperature, then in tropics, the increase is only a little bit over 1 degree. We in Estonia have 2 to 2.5 degrees. In Arctic, it's 4 degrees. And in Antarctic, it's about 2 or so degrees. So Antarctic is warming faster. And the red line is when several days in a sequence, liquid water will be available. After that, I would recommend to shut down totally tourism to Antarctica. You can't control what happens next. I think Jonna knows better the different creatures who could conquer every place in Antarctic and change the situation absolutely totally. And just once more remark, Preet mentioned in a very sad voice that there is an increase in ice mass in continental Antarctic. This is a implication of climate change. If the westerlies are weakening, the energy conservation law is saying that there will be appearing winds of different direction, which means that more new water vapor is brought through the curtain there. Sublimation of ice is a very low process. If the air is only circulating in Antarctic, it can't have any increase in ice mass, which is sublimated, is going down. So there is new, fresh water vapor now. And this is a clear feature of climate change, which is happening.
Agree, of course.
Just physics, nothing more.
It's all physics.
I can just only agree, but telling about alien species, so it's actually a very super interesting topic, and so people always wanted to predict where species can go and where they can't, and they have made the risk maps, and I can tell how wrong they can be. So, for example, a few years ago, we have had another invasive species, a mollusk, now living happily in Pärnu Bay, it's the Gulf of Riga. And then it comes from Caribbeans. So it's very warm water, crystal clear, never snow, never murky, and high salinity. So no one ever predicted that this guy could land it up here, survive, and start to think. But what makes, again, science very interesting and useful, because I've been telling a lot that we have lots of uncertainty. Many people don't understand what's the difference between uncertainty and chaos. It doesn't mean that chaos we know nothing about. We can quantify it. That's the beauty of it. So basically, we can build the models that predict something that can be usable for a scenario analysis, and we know sort of errors of confidence, and we know where are we and what to expect, and that can be very useful. And those sorts of things can be included into all these decision-making tools I told earlier.
I think it's time to open up for the floor, and also if there are questions online, I guess I will get to know them as well. Are there any questions in the room? Are you getting into afternoon slumber? Maarja.
Speaking about
compact but very efficient nations, which is one of the world top in terms of science output per capita. So it's actually a question to all of the panel members here, like where would be those gaps in data, modeling, predictions, where you all say it's most urgent, where the help is needed to understand Antarctica?
Can start. So basically, there are two elements here. So one is that we have to distinguish between the data and knowledge. That's a huge thing, because data, well, you have lots of definitions, but as I telling now, like data is the numbers and knowledge is perhaps how we interpret it. So this is a key thing. We have lots of data, a little bit less of knowledge. And what is a key is an interdisciplinary thing, so put everything together. So I think that's a crucial thing to do, not necessarily focus on certain elements.
I agree, yes. Very hard to add something. But, well, there is still a huge amount of data available, and I have discussed with scientists, and they are struggling with handling this data. They not have time enough. That's another point as well. We have to meet that.
Birgit? And I, of course, agree with what has been said, but there are geographical holes in data as well. So I think when, depending on discipline, look at the map as well. Or actually, you can look at the map and look at where the stations in Antarctica are located, and have the thought that most data is collected fairly close to stations. And if you start to look at that, you can see that there are regions in Antarctica that are less data filled than or where less data has been mined, maybe I should rather say, than other places. And for example, we talked about Trondheim is one of these areas that are don't have that many stations, and it's quite a large area, so that's one area. And that's not the only one, and it depends on the discipline, of course. But so there's knowledge, I agree completely on that. There's data, there's knowledge. Both of them needs work, but there are data gaps as well. And I think when you start looking at how you can contribute to data collection, it's also very important to look at what is being done and see how one can be compatible and put it all to a system of observations that fit together. So that's another sort of way of looking at it. How can we complement what is going on elsewhere?
Yes, I think it's absolutely expected that my opinion is that we need better mathematics. And I can explain what I mean. Additionally, it's planetary boundaries, which now are one of the most hot topics. There are very simple but absolutely rigid boundaries for at least oceanic systems. One has been mentioned is a freezing temperature. It's a temperature below which you don't have liquid water, and if you don't have a complex enough creature, you can't live there. And other thing is what I think is necessary to develop is understanding of how the Newton's laws work and how the laws of conservation of mass and energy work. They are actually very simple. We started from the question why Europe should be concerned about process in the Atlantic. One of the most hot topics today is possible stopping of Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, AMOC. I can say in this context one good news. Gulf Stream cannot stop. There are physical reasons for that. So if someone tells that Gulf Stream could stop, don't believe. We have in our sediments eel for millions of years without any interruption, which means that Gulf Stream hasn't stopped for millions of years. But AMOC can stop. It has been shown already in 1960 by Henry Stommel that for this circulation there are two stable possibilities. Both are physically and mathematically correct. Atlantic Ocean could be with AMOC and without AMOC. Now, why Southern Ocean plays any role here? Okay, Europe is in absolutely privileged situation. AMOC brings us heat from areas to the south of equator, down to 15th or 20th latitude. So it's absolutely unique. We are living in absolutely privileged situation. AMOC brings this heat to the North Atlantic, and we get it through our storms and winds and rains. But now, if we come to the Southern Ocean, there is also kind of similar overturning situation where on one layer of the ocean water is going one direction, then going down and going back in some other direction. The simple mechanics says that this kind of overturning must be constant. Otherwise you will have flooding somewhere. You can't build mountain of water. Things which go up, they must be balanced with things with water which which goes down. Up and down must be balanced. So, and the good news is that the Antarctic pumps of this kind are too weak in order to balance possible collapse of AMOC. And also the Pacific meridional overturning system is too weak to balance the gap which would occur when the AMOC will stop. So the simple physical, mechanical considerations say that we can talk about stopping of AMOC, but it will never happen unless something massive happens in Antarctica. So I really believe that simple mathematics will win in long-term run.
Perhaps I can also add a bit of on top of it, and that's a completely different thing. We keep forgetting that we are part of nature. And if we are like crossing two disciplines, like ecology, biology, and history, for example, so, and going back to recent history or in medieval times or furthermore, we can see that when you have like a huge changes in climate or whatever, so then societies become irrational. Remember late 80s, 90s? So this was a big change of the climate systems. And remember what happened, like a breakdown of Berlin Wall and so on. Now we have again a
It's
crisis.
very rational thing to do.
Yes, I mean, we are part of nature, and possibly we are like influenced about all these changes, and we hate changes, and because we want like a stable life, and that's why we are voting for populism. So it's everything is connected. So if we are fighting against the climate change, we might get a better societies.
Thank you.
I believe I still have some minutes. Any questions? Thomas?
I think I'm really contemplating the question and how to really phrase it. In one hand, I see Professor Soomere depicted kind of doomsday theory in mathematical terms. I don't know if it's in reality or not. But Maarja asked, what is the missing element in all these equations? I think in human nature, and this leads me to what you just said, and also what you said about knowledge and about opinions. And I'm trying to understand where is this predicament that opinion makers would understand facts and vice versa. This is something which is sort of irreparable, or where to find this balance between opinion makers and facts? Because I understand we see, but we don't believe, and those who believe don't see. So it's kind of difficult. Or okay, let me put it this way: is science too weak to explain to opinion makers? Yeah. That's what
definitely. I mean, we are not weak, but we are too how to say. Elitarian. And so lots of people don't understand what we do, and we are never trained how to tell to society. We are not politicians, so we don't know how to tell. And we're always saying that we have uncertainty, and I'm sure that lots of you even don't understand what's uncertainty. So it's, I'm sorry about it, but this is it. We need a better training, education, and it has to be started from a very early stage because, well, yeah, lots of evidence indicating that if childs are going to be raised up that we are a part of nature, then they are never ever questioning about why to protect nature.
Just a final question. Often I get this reaction from a financing body, because in the end it goes back to finance. I explain a lot about my science, but only to grant review committees in my next grant proposal. And then I get this question, but why Antarctic? Isn't it enough to just study Arctic? It's closer. And it's the same polar thing, isn't it enough? Like, why do we need to specifically also think of, why is it not enough for us to do just Arctic research?
Curiosity. If you are a scientist, you are curious.
Scientist. We're scientists.
Just remember,
we are scientists.
Remember the famous saying by academician in the Lemmik, everyone just buy a big jeep, climate is cooling. It happened about 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, when the satellites were getting the vertical structure of atmosphere in high latitudes completely wrong. So the heat content was just wrong, because it was built based on knowledge from temperate latitudes. And all satellites were showing that the Earth is cooling. That's why in the Lemmik, who had access to the latest science, told that the world is cooling. So the correction of this error costed billions. The same is for Antarctic. We don't have any other place in the world with this kind of vertical structure of atmosphere and heat content in the so-called land, which is ice there, plus surface air interaction. So things what are today in satellites are still wrong. So we project wrongly our future. And this is, I'm now coming at the point is different. Even if it's not possible to forecast weather for longer than 2 weeks, it is possible to forecast climate, because the equations which drive climate are different. They are no more Navier-Stokes equations. They are Fokker-Planck equations for the probability of going further from the initial state, and those equations have a very nice structure and good solutions. But if we observe wrongly what has happened in the last few decades, then our climate forecast is totally wrong. And we do have this wrong, presumably wrong component still, which is called Antarctic. And it will cost even not billions, but much more if our projections are wrong.
It's also a very practical matter of going there and doing science and taking these costs, because it will avoid you billions of costs in...
Money is a delicate problem. For my coastal science, people evaluate extremely highly the services which a nice sandy coast is providing. Some Israeli studies are saying that the cost of a nice beach is hundreds of millions of dollars. But the local communities don't invest even $100,000 into making the beach better. And the reason is, it's an old Indian saying that the money what you see in your dreams, you can't pay your bills with that.
Can't beat that. I think this is a very good explanation why we have to go to Antarctica as well as Arctic. But I would, in my simple mind, also say you can't explain Tallinn by looking at Tromsø. I mean, it's two different things. And to avoid all those problems, you really need to know both.
Sounds kind of logical, yeah.
I just said everything.
Yeah, I think you said everything. And it's also, I think it also explains when you have a well or a spring, you would not think you can pee in it just because the surface water elsewhere is polluted. So you need to protect the source of everything, the source of the environment, the source of our ecosystem. So it also makes sense to go, not only study it, but also to protect it, going to the source of our today's world. I think our time is up. Thank you very much to our panelists. Well, thank you very much to everybody who has stuck with us for a day, for this Antarctica Day. And what can I say? We hope for a lot of science funding, European involvement, and the Estonian ratification of Madrid Protocol. And before that reception.
Thank you. Thank you, professor. Aitäh. Suur aitäh. Väike märkmik. Aitäh, Jone. Aitäh, Kati, ja vabandust. Just a quick note to finish. Yes, the reception is to follow, and I'd like to really thank, on behalf of organizers, all our speakers, our panelists, our moderators and participants, both here and online. And this has been an excellent venue. We were hosted by Estonian Academy of Sciences. This very same room tomorrow will host a Nobel Prize winner, so we are in the right place, and future is bright. Thank you.